Chiti, Elin, Diolch, Pnawn da, everybody. So I will be presenting in English because I know Middle Welsh in writing, but my Welsh is what it is. So I be more at my ease in Welsh. Thank you for the warm welcome at Caux, and it's so great to have the presentation bilingual in English and also in the Celtic languages, Welsh. And I'm kind of ashamed because there's nothing in Breton on my presentation. The name of the lab is just, everything is in French. It's what a disgrace. Anyway, I will be speaking today of Ystoria Daret. Originally, the abstract I had submitted, I was supposed to give my speech for the 40 years of Caux, and for many reasons it just didn't happen, and my abstract was a little too ambitious to my taste. I tried to shorten it, but since I have a lot of time, I'll be happy to develop on all the subjects I wanted to develop on. So the title is pretty pompous, as it should be: sources, circulation, and reception of Ystoria Daret. The main thing I'll be doing today is to draw a map of the circulation and reception of Ystoria Daret. And I hope my horrible mapping skills will go unnoticed to some extent. When one thinks about Welsh medieval historiography, one will probably think of Bryd Brenhinedd, of Bryd Brenhinedd, the translation of Geoffrey of Monmouth's De Gestis Britonum, which is more known under its older title, Historia Regum Britanniae, which is the history of the kings of Britain. And this is very fair. But if Ystoria Daret, one of the works that were often associated with it, is less thought of, it seems to have had an important impact on Welsh historical writing. And indeed, it brought in this small vernacular Celtic language, Welsh, belittled by the great Latin during the Middle Ages, the principle of historical cycle that not only resulted in some of the most remarkable compilations of the Welsh Middle Ages, but most certainly the idea that historical events connect to each other. Such a connection can bring both pleasure and education to the public it aims, as some historiographical works give. Some others just don't mention it, but this is really the double goal here. I'll sum up rapidly the origin of the link between the two works. Geoffrey of Monmouth, and therefore its Welsh translation, the Bryd Brenhinedd, made the Welsh, called Bretons at the time, the descendants of Aeneas, one of the sons of Priam, king of Troy, who escaped the city of Troy as it was being pillaged and destroyed by the Greeks. Ystoria Daret tells the story that Geoffrey points without getting into much details, as this work is the translation of Darius Frigius's De Excidio Troiae, about the destruction of Troy. This work is an unauthentic eyewitness testimony of the Trojan War. It was written between the 5th and the 6th century of our era. For reasons I can develop later, if you will, Daret's account was preferred to that of Homer, which was perceived as an unreliable teller because he lived, and I quote from memory, many years after the events. This Trojan-Breton link is very visible in Welsh medieval compilations, where Ystoria Daret and Bryd Brenhinedd are systematically associated. It seems to have been the continuity of a pre-existing practice in Latin compilations, as Louis Febvre d'Arcier has shown it in his book of 2006 about the Latin versions, I mean the primary versions of Darius Frigus. In this talk, I will start by going through each of the 12 manuscripts that we still have of Ystoria Daret. So yeah, my PowerPoint is not in order. I will present each briefly, locating each of them geographically and culturally. This will give us a map made by PowerPoint, where a map of the areas where the work circulated and how the different versions of Ystoria Daret were elaborated. I will add to this map some information and places where scribes and patrons lived, because there are some famous names here, and also, if possible, the location of the very few Latin manuscripts containing Darius and Geoffrey that we're more or less certain were copied in Wales. Unfortunately, there are only 2 of them. All the others could as well have been copied or redacted in England. In the chart that you see now, so this is the chart. I'm just trying to have it. Yeah, okay. The chart you see now is based on the classification of B.G. Owens in his MA thesis in 1951. He made the first complete edition of Ystoria Daret with the most manuscripts he could find, and he also offered the first detailed classification of the work. I didn't include here the post-medieval manuscripts. They were taken into account by Owens in a subversion called 1B, and 1B doesn't appear here. It's really a copy of what you can find, the text you can find in the manuscripts classified as 1A. My very modest contribution is just to distinguish 1A, 1A1 and 1A2. So what's the difference between 1A1 and 1A2? It's that the manuscripts of 1A2 that contains merely the same text as 1A1, they add the list of fights, the tabula pugnatorum, which you find in the end of Ystoria Daret, which is a list of all the main heroes, who they killed, and possibly who they were killed with. This list of fights come from version 2B. And so you have only 2 manuscripts that are from this version. So my classification is really to make this very small difference, to distinguish all the other ones that don't have this addition. Branches of version 2, so 2A and 2B, both present very similar texts. And so the time scale that we have here is from 1330 for the earliest manuscripts to 1500. In my presentation of the manuscripts, I have led the letters by which Owens has classified them, so A, B, C, etc. And in my PhD thesis, I've just added the digraph PH for the manuscript Philadelphia Library Company of Philadelphia, 8680.0, because Owens didn't know it at the time. It's one of the, I think it's the only Welsh manuscript found in the New Continent. It's in Philadelphia, as the name gives it. So let's see the first map. So no, let's not see the first map. Sorry, let's see the very first manuscript, because this manuscript Cardiff Central Library 1.362 is the one manuscript that doesn't provide much information about its possible place of origin. So I don't have a map for it. It is nevertheless noteworthy that it is found associated with Bryd y Brenhinedd, with the version that is called Bryd Dingestow, and it usually this version of Bryd y Brenhinedd is associated with manuscripts that belongs to version 2. I'll talk about this a little later when we have the full map of the manuscripts. Let's see the first map, and so yes, all of them are going to be in this style. I'm very sorry. So the first manuscript to include a map, National Library of Wales 3035B. has no very specific place, but we know it was very much probably copied in the north of Wales. As you can see, it has Ystoria Daret, followed by Bryd y Brenhinedd and Bryd y Tywysogion. The other manuscript, I'm going to take them together, is manuscript British Library, additional 709, and this one is linked to Gwydir. Both manuscripts seem to have been copied in the north part of Wales, so they're both from version 1A. Let's remember this information because it's going to be important later. And in both these manuscripts, Ystoria Daret is associated with the Hergest version of Bryd y Brenhinedd. When we look at the versions, it makes sense, but geographically, not so much, because the Red Book of Hergest is very famously known from the south, but we'll see. There's a story here, there's a geographical story here. As you can see, we have the same manuscript, so they're not very Welsh names, but the names that Daniel Hughes gave them. So X92 is famously from the north of Wales, and in the second manuscript, so 709, you also find back the association Ystoria Daret, Bryd y Brenhinedd. Let's move on to the next manuscript, and here we can see that we have shifted to the south of Wales. We don't have so first manuscript Philadelphia, the one I was referring to earlier, that was found after B.G. Owens wrote his thesis. That is from a later time, end of the 14th century, maybe beginning of the 15th. And I'm going to mention right away the second one because they go also together, Penarth 263. For both these manuscripts, sorry, Ystoria Daret is associated to Bryd y Brenhinedd, version 1 going with the Hergest version. It matches the geographical consistence of an area of copying that seemed to be on the rise in the end of the 14th century and the 15th and the beginning of the 15th century, the Abertawe Peninsula and its surroundings. For the manuscript Philadelphia, we don't really have a place of redaction, but we have the birthplace of Hywel Vychan, which is Bwellt, and the land of Hopkin ap Thomas, so Ynys Forgan, but it points towards the south of Wales, generally. As for the other one, Penarth 263, which text and dates match with Philadelphia, is thought to have been written in the same area and period. It therefore comforts me in the idea that this new center of manuscript production is the same for both manuscripts. So, so far, I would assume that both were redacted in Llandilo. With the next one, so here we're shifting to manuscript 1A2. So I'm sorry for all the shortenings. If anyone is interested in the PowerPoint, I will gladly send it. It will be easier to if you need to take some notes in the future. So with the famous Red Book of Hergest, Llyfr Hergest, and also Penarth 19, that is just here, we move to the version, as I said, 1A2, the one with the Tabula Pugnatorum taken from version 2. But we stay in the same period and roughly in the same area. Here the compilation seems to have evolved, including also Bryd y Tywysogion, Hergest version for both Bryd y Brenhinedd and Bryd y Tywysogion. Sorry, yeah, I'm showing it here. It is clear from what we've seen before that the core of it is still the Trojan-Breton cycle of Ystoria Daret and Bryd y Brenhinedd. So I know, of course, among the Welsh generally. British Wysogion is of has had more. There was more interest for British Wysogion because it was seen as more purely Welsh. It was telling really local history. But I agree to develop this later. I think that Ystoria Daret was in a way also telling Welsh history, and since it was more mythical or at least more structural in the Welsh identity in the Middle Ages, that's why Ystoria Daret was more important and was more in the core of the historiographical construction that you find in its manuscripts. So did I say everything I wanted to say? Yes. So we think that the Red Book was produced in Batinev in Neath Abbey, and for Peniath 19 we have a rougher estimate, which is in the Morganwg. Let's go back now. Let's go back in time now with version 2A and its sole witness, the manuscript Cotton Cleopatra BV Part 3. So it's a manuscript with a pretty complex history, a more chaotic history, if you will. And the result of this chaotic history is that Ystoria Daret is in another part than Bryd Brenhinedd. But there is little doubt, from what I've read at least, that they were not thought, here again, as a cycle. Cotton Cleopatra is supposed to be probably the oldest witness of Ystoria Daret. It was already thought as a cycle, which is interesting and actually not that surprising, and I'll come back to this later. This manuscript is the source of the end of the sub-version 1A2 because it includes the Tabula Pugnatorum. But as you see here, we haven't only gone back in time, we have gone back in the north. So at the same time, version 1 and version 2 seem to have to be produced at first in the north, and then they've moved south, at least some of them. This manuscript seems to have been produced in the Abbey of Valle Crucis, Glynagrois, which, as we will see, is the prominent redaction center of version 2. So here we see that there is an association between Bryd Brenhinedd, Brynedd Saeson. In another part, you find the laws of Hywelda, and in the third part, you find Ystoria Daret. Not only was Valle Crucis a prominent center, but it was a long-lasting one. The three manuscripts of version 2B, so that go on with the same text as 2A, so which are the Black Book of Basing, Jesus College 141, and Peniath 25. They were all made in Valle Crucis. Maybe with like this it will be easier. They were all produced in Valle Crucis, but they're on the other end of our timeline. So here we have not gone back in time, we have gone back in the future, which is the end of the 15th century and probably the beginning of the 16th century. But here, as we can see, version 2 is specifically rooted in the north of Wales, and specifically for the Black Book of Basing work and Jesus College 141, associated to the famous figure of Gytyn Owain. Here again, you can see an association between Ystoria Daret, Bryd Brenhinedd, and some of the text, Brynedd Saeson for Llyfr du Basing, Pump Ois Bid for Jesus College 141. So here again, I draw a bit on this. You have the core history of Trojans and Bretons, and you can have a sequel or a prequel, such as Pimp Ois a Bid. For the third one, Pignard 25, from the end of the 15th century, we're not sure of the writer, but we have here again this core, very important, very stable, of Ystoria Daret and Brede Brenhine. Now let's move on to version 3, Pignard 47 part 1, which is not finished. It's not complete. It was written by the anchorite of Llan Dewi Brevi. I worked on this, and it was copied in Strata Florida. So it's the only manuscript from Strata Florida, and it's also the only version from the middle of the country. But we'll see. It's again at a strategic moment. It's written more or less at the same period at manuscript Cardiff 1.362, which is in the north at this moment, and probably a little later than manuscript Cotton Cleopatra, also copied in the north. But the redaction center is more south, and it kind of adds up with the evolution of version 1, though it's a slightly different version. It is interesting. What is my next slide? Yeah, I'll go back on this later. It is interesting to see the versions of Ystoria Daret being associated with corresponding versions of Brede Brenhine. Version 1a goes with the Herges version, version 2 with the Cleopatra version, version 3 with the Dingesto version. Of course, it's not perfect because some versions go with other versions, but generally it's this type of associations are systematic. There is one exception, the manuscript Cardiff, that I mentioned a few times. It is also noteworthy that manuscripts belonging to the same versions were copied in the same place, especially Valle Crucis for those of version 2, or Strata Florida for version 3. As for version 1a, the places are more scattered. Most of these abbeys evoked in this talk are indeed Cistercian abbeys, such as Strata Florida, Hendigwyn, that I will mention just after, Glenagrois, etc. And the role of Cistercian scriptoria appears clearly in the copy and transmission of Ystoria Daret, just as they do regarding Brede Brenhine. Janet Burton and Karen Sturbar, who wrote a book about abbeys and priories of medieval Wales in 2000s, have shown the role of these abbeys and the strong bonds they had with the Welsh Uchelwyr since the settlement of the abbeys of the order, and its expansion in the late 12th century. The authors identified the end of this expansion in 1201. More than strictly religious, the Cistercian order had a political and cultural activity in Wales, and there was a very good link between Welsh noblemen and this particular religious order. It is no surprise, therefore, that the only Latin manuscript of the Trojan-Breton cycle that has been precisely localized in Wales is manuscript Exeter Cathedral Library 3514 from between the 13th and 14th century. This manuscript was produced at the Cistercian Abbey of Hendigwyn, and so to end this map, I also need to evoke manuscript Dublin, Trinity College 515, that, according to Louis Fèvre d'Arcier, was copying either in Wales or England. This manuscript is interesting because it also contains the history of Geoffrey, no surprise, with Middle Welsh glosses in the margin. So if we want a full map of the circulation of Dares, here we have it. If you look at the end of Ynys Forgan, that's more or less when you find Hendy Gwyn. And so you have the Latin abbey on the top to complete the map. So here you can see the early development, the early translation work of Ystoria Daret happening in the north. I need to be more precise about the fact that version 1 and version 2 are two different texts. They copy the same, they translate the same text, but they're different translations. And so these two translations seem to have been produced in the north at first, and one of them just went down south, probably under the demands of specific noblemen. So first there was some work in Strata Florida, and then it's in the Abertawe area that there was more production. For all the rest, version 2 went on being copied in the north, and I need to outline the fact that if version 1 and 2 are very distinct, the versions, all the manuscripts of the versions are very close to each other. You can see very bizarre expressions that don't really make sense in Welsh that have just been copied for centuries, no question asked. And the fact that this text was copied over and over again for reasons that are not very easy to clarify. I have some hypotheses, but show that really the work of translation from Latin to Welsh is early, happened in the north, and then all these versions lived, if I may say it like that, their own life. To finish my talk, and I'm afraid now I'm being too long, in the abstract to this talk, I offered to draw the map of the manuscript, but I also offered to discuss the possible Latin sources the scholars could have had at hand and how the work was quoted in other medieval texts. I'm afraid then that I bit off more than I could chew, and I was a bit afraid to get way out of, let's say, a simple theme. But I will give a small list of projects I'm aiming towards in the future, and maybe that will draw some ideas for questions. So the first point I wanted to make is that obviously to give a new dimension to this map, first I need to train myself on professional map softwares. There would be an interesting things to make let's say different maps with a chronological order, seeing how the different versions appear the one after the other and how they live together, maybe with some arrows to show the shiftings. But it would be also interesting to draw the map of Bryd I Brenhinedd and maybe of the sequels, Bryd I Tywysogion and maybe Brenhinedd the Saeson. This could show more clearly the associations of similar versions and how some texts moving to different parts of the country sometimes met and sometimes just went off the other. For example, how Brydingesto went to move more south while the Cleopatra version just stayed around in the north. The second point about Latin sources, about possible Latin sources, it's a very complex topic for a number of reasons. First reason is there's no manuscript that matches exactly the text of any of the versions of Ystoria Daret. Only some manuscripts coming near enough, and so hypotheses come from it. Among these manuscripts, a few share important discriminating traits, and I can try to answer specific questions if you have some after the end of my talk. One remark, though, that seems pretty important to me is that it's very probable that Dares was already known in England before 1150, and Erich Popper noted similarities in the way proper nouns are translated in Togaltroy, the Irish translation of Dares, copied in the 11th century, and Ystoria Daret. So there are no certainties, but we can suppose that Dares was circulating between Ireland and Wales as soon as the 10th century, because Togaltroy is a very early translation, or with more tempered optimism, that it was known and possibly translated in the course of the 13th century, and probably before 1282. The possibility that it was translated at the same time as Geoffrey's Historia is therefore quite probable, though not certain. The third point I want to make is that Ystoria Daret is directly mentioned as at the end of a Bibel Ungemreich as the most reliable source of the descendants of Japhet, that are the Trojans. If you remember, Japhet is one of the three sons of Noah. I've also found a mention of Hector in the beginning of Bride Wisogion. I think it was in the beginning, but I'm not sure. I hadn't time to check this information. And I'm not sure even that this reference to Hector is coming directly from Ystoria Daret. My research here is not complete yet, and a full list of mentions, at least of Trojan characters, could help completing a map of the circulation and mostly reception of Ystoria Daret. In order to conclude, I hope I was able to show in this talk the importance of Ystoria Daret in the construction of Welsh historiography, inasmuch as an auxiliary to Bryd Brenhinedd, and therefore as an extension and a justification of it. The fact it didn't have such an important posterity can be explained first by the revival of Homer as well as the poor style of Dares. But this fake eyewitness remains an important artifact of the development of the historical method in Western Europe, and specifically among Welsh-speaking scholars. Thank you.